What's up, Luke?
Hi, Dr. John. Thank you so much for taking my call.
For sure, man. What's up, dude?
Yeah, so one thing is I'm, kind of a younger generation, part of the millennials, and
How old are you?
I can feel myself. I am I'm 33. I always have a hard time remembering my age.
You're not that old. I'm old enough to forget my age. Okay, so 33. All right, go for it.
Yeah, so I can feel myself getting more and more resentful towards older generations the more that I interact with my own parents, as well as, media can be toxic. I understand that. I can avoid that. But it just seems like a lot of what happens in conversations is that, the millennials and the Gen Zs are destroying America. They're doing all, it gets political, which is whatever. But it feels like the more that they talk about these things, the more I do research and I find, a lot of projection in what they're saying. And it just makes me feel resentful, which I hate feeling that way.
Sure. So since we started this call, all you've talked about is them. Tell me about you. What do you do for a living?
Well, right now I'm a recruiter. I hire people for the company I work for.
Okay. What's your annual salary?
73 a year.
Okay. And 73 in Omaha, Nebraska. 73. If I'd made $73,000 when I got out of college, that would have been borderline rich in my head, right? I grew up poor. Not poor, but we grew up lower middle class. $73,000 would have felt like $1 million. For you, with rent, do you own a home or are you renting?
I own a home.
Okay. So owning a home, keeping the thing up, keeping groceries, like the last few years, 73 suddenly becomes pretty tight, huh?
It does, yeah.
Okay. Tell me about your relationship with your parents, just growing up with them.
Yeah, so growing up, when we were younger, all of our summers were pretty much spent with our grandparents just because my parents were younger. They got married at like 18 or 19. And so they needed a lot of help. And my grandparents lived about an hour away from where my parents lived. And so, we spent 3 months with my grandparents. And then during the school year, we'd be in town with my parents. And it was great. My grandparents were great. My parents were great. But, I just remember a lot of times when, my mom struggles a lot with ADHD, and she didn't have the greatest upbringing herself. And so being a parent was a very new thing for her, when we were growing up. And so there was a lot of things like dates that were important to me that would get passed by as either, I forgot, or things where...
hey, Luke, you're talking in circles, buddy. Get real specific for me.
Oh, sorry.
Let me say it like this. That's not about radio performance or anything like that, or like being a good caller.
Right.
It's about you've been covering for your mom for a long time. Fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
And you've been pissed off that your dad doesn't cover for you guys. Dad covers for mom too.
Yeah.
Tell me specifically. Did your mom forget birthdays? Did your mom forget school days? Like, what did your mom forget?
Yeah. So days when, birthdays. Well, not at home, but at school. Like the things that all my peers were doing.
Sure.
It always felt like their parents would talking elementary school and really young as opposed to older, because once it got older, it didn't matter. But
it did matter. It did matter. But she didn't show up. She didn't show up in the way that other kids' moms showed up, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's I'm being willing to bet that's the benign version.
Yeah.
Was home messy too? A little bit chaotic?
Yeah.
Okay.
The most recent thing is back in 2016, I was baptized, and it was a really big deal for me.
Sure.
And my family's Christian, but okay. I was baptized into a specific denomination, and it was really important. And I remember telling my family, weeks and weeks before, and oh yeah, this is great, And then the morning of, I was like, okay, so are you coming? I'll make sure you have seats. How many are coming? Like, I forgot, or she didn't say she forgot, but I've got this other thing that I forgot about. I won't be able to make it. And so, I was kind of the only one. And
what happened recently, Luke? What precipitated this call?
So me, my wife, and my child, we go over there all the time just to hang out with them. And so when we're hanging out, we're always having conversations. And I think the thing that really precipitated everything was just every time I talk to them, all I hear is about how, the younger people are doing this and that. And then when I try to involve in the conversation and be like, hey, well, here's these other things and stuff, I always feel like I'm hurting I can't have an opinion without hurting their feelings. Because it's personal to them. Everything is personal. I can't talk about anything that I care about because either they're not interested or it's too personal.
Okay. So other than there's telling somebody that they love, telling somebody that their loved ones passed away, there's telling somebody that I think their marriage is probably over. This is the third hardest conversation to have. Okay? So I'm just going to shoot you straight, all right?
Okay.
And it's a both and conversation. Let's just pick the 2016 thing. That was a big deal. And your parents didn't show up. Right?
Yeah.
And, Luke, that was in 2016. That was 8 years ago. So, mom and dad didn't show up. And by the way, that's not a new thing for them. They've continued to be consistent your entire life since elementary school when they didn't show up for important things. And yet, every day you wake up and you hand a movie, like you turn on the movie cameras and you cast them in a movie that they don't even know that they're in, and then you get mad at them for not knowing their lines. And then you keep going over to their house. And you keep showing up and you keep showing up, and they keep hurting you and they keep hurting you. Resentment is wanting something to be different, but having no power to make it so. And so, in a strange way, your resentment of them is a choice you continue to make over and over and over again. They're not going to change.
Yeah.
They do life the way they do life, which is, very selfishly, all about them. And if they ever feel uncomfortable, it's somebody else's fault. And it could have been uncomfortable because of finances. It could have been uncomfortable because married kids when they were 18 and 19, and they had to figure it out. And now their life is probably pretty good. And so their discomfort is other people's ideas. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But you keep waltzing into that saying, and action. And they don't know their lines, and then you get hurt by it. And so your choice is to cut them off, which I don't recommend, or to make peace with that. And here's what making peace is not to let people run over you, but making peace is you deciding I'm going to take ownership of my side of this relationship and put up boundaries. What does that mean? That means in the Delony house, me and my mom and dad do not discuss politics, period, end of story. We do not. We very, very rarely discuss religion. Period, end of story. And that's a boundary I put into place.
Sure.
Because I love them enough and I want to stay in relationship with them. And also, if I dread going to their house every time, I'm bringing a negative attitude to my mom and dad's house. That's not honoring of them.
Yeah.
But I'm choosing to go. So if I'm going to choose to go, I want to choose that. I want that interaction to be positive. And for that interaction to be positive, I don't want to sit there for 45 minutes and debate politics. I don't want to debate what's happening in the world stage. Right?
Yeah.
And so they've been really honoring of that. And I love talking to my folks. And occasionally politics stuff comes out. We make fun of each other. Occasionally religion stuff comes out. We make fun of each other. We laugh. But it's because that boundary exists. And I refuse to resent my parents.
Sure.
Does that make sense? And so here's what I'm trying to give you as a 33-year-old with your own little kid.
Mm-hmm.
You've had this picture of the way of a world you want to be true. It is not going to look like that. Period. End of story. And what millions and millions of people do in your situation is they continue to bang their head against that wall. Then they go to their therapists and they say, my parents don't love me. And they use words like abuse and they use words like trauma. They use all these words. And mom and dad have just been consistent. They've just been the way they're going to be. And so the hard work here is not convincing people who have no interest in being convinced of anything differently, even with facts and data.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is saying, all right, I have to adjust my picture of what this looks like, or I have to walk away.
Yeah.
That makes sense? This is you reclaiming ownership. And so what should happen is you should feel empowered and you should feel deep grief for a while.
Okay.
How does that sit with you? Because here's the deal, it's not going to change. I have this conversation about inflation, about how expensive things are now relative to where they were for our parents. Okay, you're right. And then every one of us is faced with that question, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
I had this conversation with my son this weekend. He's going into high school. And usually I'm not really specific about him just because he's older. Sure. But he's got a dad that's the worst, man. Because I don't let him play Fortnite. I don't let him get into I don't let him get into games where people are logging in. I don't know all that stuff. And that's frustrating as a high school kid. I get that, man. It's the worst. But here's the conversation we had this weekend. My granddad got a letter from the federal government saying you are going to war to fight Nazis. And he got on a bus and went halfway across the United States to fight Nazis. My mom was 21 years old when the government said, you now can go get a checking account without your husband's signature. You can put your name on a mortgage without your husband's signature. That's my mom. That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And now my son is born into a world where a 14-year-old is handed the internet and makes one wrong sentence. And it never, ever, ever will go away. Period.
Yeah.
Right? So here's what I'm saying. Yeah. Every single generation is born into something they didn't ask for, something they didn't cause, but something they are forced to reckon with. And the challenge is, are we going to sit there and just complain and piss and moan about the hand we've been dealt? Or are we going to play cards? And I think our media, our government says, don't do anything. You're too stupid. You're too unable. You come to our side of the sideline or the other side of the sideline, and we'll pat you on the head and we'll take care of you because you're inept. And I just don't buy that.
Yeah.
I think we have the opportunity to say, yeah, this sucks. And so here's the next thing I'm going to do. Here's the next right move for me and my family. And sometimes, rarely, that means I'm going to end some relationships. Sometimes that means I'm going to put some boundaries up. And other people might end the relationships because of my boundaries. That might mean I got to work 3 jobs. Which, by the way, I did with 2 PhDs. I worked 3 jobs to pay stuff off, to get to where I wanted to be. Like, I didn't like it. It is what it is. But what I'm not going to do is just stew in resentment, man. It's not. And I've got a sneaking suspicion, I may be crazy, maybe I'm out to lunch, But there were some things that your mom did pretty rad that other moms didn't do. Maybe not.
That's true.
Was she a hilarious,
that's
chaotic,
true.
fun mom?
Yeah.
Like if the music comes on, does she just start dancing? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Does she?
That's her.
Okay. So me and my wife joke all the time. My kids have never missed an appointment, ever. Not one time. But when the music comes on, my wife kind of just fades to the shadows. And she's like, that's your job. You're the dancer. Right? And so I'm not trying to absolve her. I'm saying most parents, most of the time, there's abusive, evil parents, and this show is full of those conversations. But most parents, most of the time, are doing the best they can with the tools they got. And they're going to mess up some things, and they're going to do some things pretty amazing. And they're going to be pretty boring and just right in the middle most of the time. And sometimes it's like this weekend. I told my son, hey, you've got 6 things to think about. I have 6,000 things to think about. And you're right. This thing that was a priority for you was down on the bottom of my list, and I'm sorry. But not really, but kind of. And that's most of us. And so we got to decide. I think our culture is too disposable with relationships. We throw away dating relationships. We throw away marriages. We throw away our parents. We throw away aunts and uncles, whatever. And man, outside of abuse and downright cruelty, I'm going to make my boundaries, and I'm going to go along and do the next right thing. I think question I want you to ask, Luke, and I want you and your wife to get away for a weekend. Ask yourselves, who do we want to be? And what do we want our house to feel like when we walk home every day? What conversations do we want to have? What conversations do we not want to have? And then you have to do the hard work of letting other people know these are our boundaries. We don't want to talk about these things. I do want to talk about these things. Right? But that's your boundary to draw. And at some level, resentment becomes a choice. And I'm going to choose guilt over resentment every single time. Because most of the people we resent don't deserve our resentment because they're just doing what they're doing. And we never bother to tell them, hey, we don't like that. We don't love that. We're not going to have this conversation anymore. Or we'll just head out. Hope that helps, my brother. I'm grateful for you. I can feel it on you. Here's my challenge to you. Set it down. Quit carrying it. Quit carrying it. You got a little one now that needs all your attention. You got a wife that needs your attention. You got a young man in the mirror that needs your attention. Let's start there, dude. Let's just set that stuff down and be free. Let's go on and do the next right thing.